Hi there, thanks for joining. Why is it that sometimes you see your brush marks and other times you don't see your brush marks? First off, the choice of brush is important. If you have a brush with very hard bristles, like a toothbrush for instance, then you clearly see brush marks. If you use a softer brush, chances are that you see less brush marks. But there are more points, and all these points are interconnected with each other, of course, because sometimes one thing cannot go without another, but it becomes clear in a moment. If by now you feel very inspired to start painting with a toothbrush, then don't forget to clean the brush thoroughly afterwards. Whenever your brush is too soft for the substance you're painting with, then you get brush marks as well, so it's always a matter of finding a balance. Second important thing is the surface that you paint on. If you paint on a very textured surface, then of course chances are that you see the brush marks. If you paint on a more smooth surface, then you won't see brush marks. However, if your surface is too smooth, then your brush marks become visible again, because then you have a very slippery surface and that gives a very strange painting experience. But that's also why, for example, gesso provides a little bit of tooth. It feels a little bit smooth, but it has a little bit of tooth, so that the paint will come off the bristles. Now, the priming of a surface also plays a very important part. If you pre-prime your canvas, paper, panel with gesso, then you have a good surface to work on with your paint and you have less chance of seeing the brush marks. Here I have a canvas board. This side is pre-primed by the manufacturer, so there is already a layer of gesso on it. But these layers of gesso are always a little bit of bad quality. So on this side I've added 2 extra layers of gesso myself, and here you can see what a difference that makes. With the same brush and the same amounts of paint, on the right side you clearly see the brush marks, on the left side you don't see them that clearly, and also you get more mileage out of your paint. So of course it all depends on what you want, because if you want to see a brush mark, and some people like that effect, then of course keep your surface as textured as possible, so leave it alone then. So you can pre-prime paper with gesso as well. I've made a video already about that, but then you can add a little bit of water to your gesso to make a smooth layer of gesso on your paper. Also, the amount of paint that you use. If you use little paint on your brush, then again there's more chance of seeing brush marks. When you load your brush properly with paint, with enough paint, then you hardly see brush marks. And also keep in mind with acrylics, sometimes in wet form you see a kind of texture, these ridges in the paint. But acrylics dry rather flat, so these brush marks that you see in wet form will disappear most of the times. Number 5 is also important. With more transparent pigments you will more quickly see brush marks, because you can better see what happens. So if you paint with ultramarine, for example, and you see too many brush marks for your liking, then try using a slightly softer brush. That will help most of the times. Also, when you would dilute the paint a little bit, then it also gets more transparent of course, but then the paint gets more runny, more fluid. Then also chances are that you see brush marks sooner. And the runnier, the more fluid the paint is, and the less you want to see brush marks, the softer brush you should try to use. That's also why watercolor brushes are quite soft always. But keep in mind, diluting acrylics too much with water can harm your painting, because the pigments will fall off the canvas. So if you want to work in very transparent layers, try to use regular painting medium. That way your paint also gets a little bit more runny, more fluid, but also it gets more transparent. But the pigments will stick together then. The drying time of your paint also plays an important part, and Some things you can control, some things you can't. The humidity of the air in your environment is a little bit difficult sometimes to control. But if you live in a very dry, warm climate, your paints will dry more quickly than here in the Netherlands, where it's cold and humid. But other things we can control. For instance, the surface that we paint on. If we paint on paper without gesso in it, and we make a brush stroke, then the paint will dry almost immediately in the paper, because the paper absorbs the moisture from the acrylics. So then you see the appearance of a brush mark. And the last thing I want to point out is the technique that you use to paint. So if you paint very quick, large brush strokes like this, then you will more quickly see brush marks than when you use little pressure and let the brush do its work slowly and steadily. So that makes a difference as well. And also the amount of pressure that you apply on your brush. If you push very hard, you will see brush marks. And if you push gently, you won't see brush marks. And last but not least, of course, I have to test out my hair. I'll put it in the paint over here. And now I will start painting with it. Like that. It's reasonably okay. Thanks for watching. See you next time.